Well, thank you so much for joining us. This is actually our third debrief in a series. We've already done one with Arizona and one with Georgia. And today we have Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist with us, who will be talking about what's up in Michigan and how they did such incredible work to flip that state and put us in the win column. I do want to thank all of our donors and everyone for your support both this cycle and your past support. We are just so thrilled about the outcome with this election that we thought we needed to bring to you more information about how we actually did it, how people did it. And I also wanted to say thank you so much to Crooked Media and the Pod Save America folks who fundraised for us and allowed us to invest in a number of community groups in Michigan. Along with the Lieutenant Governor's help, we were able to identify and work with some key groups on the ground that were able to do some great work in terms of turning out votes and so on. So I want to thank everyone for visiting here and being a part of this little webinar that we're doing. And I don't think there's much that I need to do to introduce the Lieutenant Governor. He is an amazing both activist as well as leader in the state of Michigan. And I think he has done some tremendous work to make sure that democracy is protected and saved. And, they are one of the people that saved us this last cycle. So I want to hand it over to him and, let him kind of thrill us with all the work that they did this last cycle.
Well, thank you, Andy. It's good to be here with you. It's good to be here with PowerPack as an organization. I really have had the pleasure of knowing Andy and Steve and the PowerPack family for a number of years now, since I actually began my own work in the movement. For those who don't know, I left a career as a software developer to join the progressive movement as a community organizer in 2009. And I actually met Andy, I think probably in 2009 or 2010, sometime around then, and have just always been impressed with his intelligence and like the precision with which he thinks about what we need to do to build power and make change. And so really proud to be here with you to connect with y'all to talk about something I'm very proud of, which is the work that was done in Michigan. And it wasn't work that was just done this year, but the work that has been building over time as people have worked to invest in voter empowerment, voter mobilization, community mobilization, and how that came to fruition during this 2020 election cycle. Michigan, like, so many other places, we were in shock after the 2016 election. Our state was the closest state, the slimmest margin by which Donald Trump won any state. And just to say something about that, seeing how this election itself has played out, one thing that I think is really clear and true is that Donald Trump was more proud of his victory in Michigan than he was of his victory in any other state. The whole narrative of 16, this blue wall in Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania, the one he really, really took pride in was Michigan. He spent more time in Michigan than any of those states during his presidency. Thank God that it is about to be officially over. He campaigned here aggressively. His final campaign events in both 2016 and 2020 were rallies that went on to 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning in Western Michigan. This is a state that he really cared deeply about. Some of his most ridiculous attempts to undermine the election results, including one of the most nakedly corrupt actions that we have seen to undermine the results, involved Michigan Republican lawmakers. Like, he just really cared a lot about Michigan. So it's particularly important that we were able to beat him back here and have Trump lose to Joe Biden by a margin that was more than 15 times the margin that Donald Trump won Michigan in 2016. But the question is, why did that happen? How did that happen? And this really happened, I think, because we focused on two big things. One is that we know that we need to turn out our voters on our side. If we turn out, when turnout is higher, even when it was higher across the board, and I'll get to that in a minute, but when turnout's higher, Democrats can win. And that's what we saw in Michigan. The other piece is that we decided that we were going to compete everywhere. And the slide that you're seeing right now is, I think, one of the more interesting and illustrative sort of depictions of the election results. What you're looking at is a map of the state, and each county is sort of sectioned off. And what you're looking at is the vote totals, or excuse me, the margin of victory in each county between 2016 and 2020. So for example, on the left in 2016, you'll see that lone blue dot in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan with a 4.2. That's Marquette County, Michigan, and that means that Hillary Clinton won Marquette County by 4.2 percentage points. If you go to 2020, you'll see that same place in the Upper Peninsula has an 11.1. That means that Joe Biden won that county by 11 points. So the margin was bigger. What you'll notice, and you're looking at all of these numbers, almost every one of them, there are a couple of minor exceptions, but what you'll see is that not only did Democrats flip some counties that we didn't flip in 2016, we flipped them blue in 2020, but we also decreased Trump's margin in lots and lots of places. That is a result of investment across the state of Michigan in organizing infrastructure. You know, this is the infrastructure that we built in 2018 when I was elected alongside Governor Gretchen Whitmer. We competed in every part of the state, and we used that infrastructure to try to help Joe Biden make gains in Michigan. And this helped us deliver the victory because we didn't lose by big margins in those rural areas. And we really tried to run up the score in our more urban areas. If you're looking at down in the southeast part of Michigan, Wayne County is the sort of the second darkest blue dot on the in the bottom right. That's where Detroit is. It's where I'm speaking with you from today. Oakland County, which there was a lot of discussion about immediately to the left there, it has a 46.5 in the 2021. Oakland County and Washtenaw County, Macomb County, which we were unable to flip this time. But what you're seeing here is the benefit of investment. And there's another story that this tells as well, and that's about voters of color. So there are a lot of people of color, for example, in Michigan, Black voters, Black people, we make up 13.6% of the population, but we are overrepresented in the electorate. And that happened because of mobilization. One of the things that I focused on really specifically is trying to do the work to make sure that Black voters had what they needed to vote using new tools this cycle. You see, we were a state that knew that we were going to see an increase in vote by mail, but the pandemic wasn't the only thing driving that. In 2018, the voters of Michigan made it significantly easier to vote absentee by no longer requiring people to have an excuse to vote absentee. So we were expecting to see a tremendous uptick in that. We also voted in important election and ballot access reforms, like enabling same-day voter registration, where you could register to vote up to and including on election day, rather than having this, arbitrary 30-day deadline before the election that you had to register to vote. We reinstated straight party voting so that you could basically fill in one bubble and vote for all the Democrats on the ballot, something that wasn't true before. And because of that, what you're seeing is that the ease in voting, and then with the pandemic, we accelerated, obviously, the ease in which we enable people to vote by mail by sending everyone in the state absentee ballot applications. We saw a turnout rate that was the highest in 3 or 4 generations that we've seen. You want to go to that next slide. That's fine. What we saw was a turnout rate of 68.5%. I want to see that number get to 100, but what I have seen is, in this map shows that we have seen turnout just trending upward and trending in the right direction. And this is a map that we want to consistently and persistently get darker and darker and darker orange. What you're seeing is an effect of two things. One, again, the Democratic Party and the progressive movement really organizing to turn out voters. But on the flip side of it, we also do have to recognize that Republicans had a lot of turnout too. And so what that does to me is it increases the urgency of the investment that we need to make in the deep canvassing and deep organizing and deep relational work, and that we need to be able to do that everywhere. We need to do it in the deepest, bluest parts of our state where we can run up the score. And we need to do it in the parts of our state where Democrats have struggled or where Democrats aren't currently winning. But we know that we can talk to people about values and about what they want to see for the future and about opportunity and about economic inequality. And the fact that, we can deliver for them politically, and we can deliver for them as leaders. And so I think what this shows to me, this map, is that people are willing to vote if they are engaged, if they are organized, if people connect with them. And so now, as a Democrat, a Democratic elected official, I think it's our responsibility to meet those people where they are in a way that makes sense. Certainly things are not as safe as they could be during the pandemic, and so we need to find more creative ways to reach out. But we also need to, when we're ready to do so, when it is safe to do so, we're going to need to go and see people, and we're going to need to talk to them. We're going to need to do those small group conversations, the door-to-door work. That ultimately is what will move people's hearts and minds in the direction that we need them to go, so that we can win, and that we can win for the long term. I talked about how much Trump cares about Michigan. This tweet is one of the many just horrendous and horrific lies that Donald Trump told about the Michigan election. And he spent a lot of time talking about Detroit. So as a person who spent a lot of time, energy, effort, and resources organizing Black voters and organizing Black men to vote in particular, I'm particularly offended by this when you combine it with some of the narrative that's coming out of this election that I want to kind of reset. So President Trump did make some gains with Black voters. President Trump in the city of Detroit got more votes than he did in 2016. Now, why did that happen? And what is the way that we can buttress that? Well, I think one of the reasons it happened is because the president's campaign spent a ton of very cynically targeted money to try to lie to Black voters about what he did for them. The truth is, this has been the most dangerous administration, I think, since the antebellum slavery, in terms of how it has attacked and made safety completely non-existent for Black people in our state and in our country. But I think that targeted investment, did lead to them trying to at least get a couple of more people around the margins. But for them, after the election, for the president to turn around and attack a city like Detroit, that is 79% Black, our electorate is more than 84% Black, to attack the city of Detroit, to attack those Black voters that he allegedly wanted to recruit, shows me what the truth is about how he, and frankly, I think how the Republican Party views Black people. And there's people who are not empowered and who should not have any power, and especially should not have any political power. That's important because that means that we have an opportunity to build the relationships to fill this space with voters of color, with voters in the city of Detroit who may have been disaffected, who may have been not turned out on a consistent basis, who are unfortunately used to being spoken to only at election time and not in between elections. So I'm going to talk about some of the work that we're going to do to continue to keep people engaged in this city and around the state. But I just want to make sure that we understand what the truth is. The truth here is that when people are primed to be organized, but it is the organizer's responsibility to do it. It's our responsibility to step up and to step in, to understand what people's priorities are, so that we can frankly inoculate people against those who are willing to come and lie to them and say whatever sing-songy thing they want to try to convince people that their best interest is not for voting for a more progressive future rather than this more regressive, hate-filled, racist one that Republicans across the board are continuing to offer them. So we have work to do, and I just know that this work is in our grasp. So thank God that we did our job and that Donald Trump did not win Michigan. All of his attempts to undermine the election have failed. They will continue to do so. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about what are some of the things that we did. This is a barbershop on the west side of Detroit where I hosted what's called a shop talk event with now VP-elect Kamala Harris. That's a minister from Detroit who's on the left side. We held these events, frankly, across the state of Michigan. I did them in Detroit, I did them in Flint, Michigan, I did them in Pontiac, I did them in Benton Harbor, these community conversations. And what they were focused on specifically, they were focused on Black men and recognizing that Black men are a voting bloc, a group of people who, unfortunately have felt left out of the conversation about movement building and power. I think that I talked to a lot of guys around the state who were very proud that Black women had shown over generations themselves to be a reliable and true voting bloc that people can and should trust. But some of them also didn't understand sort of where they fit into that, and didn't feel like candidates and campaigns and organizations were speaking to them directly enough, and were wondering what they should do with their political power. Should they even spend their political capital? Should they even vote? That, of course, to me as a Black man, as the only Black man elected to statewide office, as the highest ranking Black man ever elected to statewide office in Michigan, I took that as a responsibility and an opportunity to be able to connect and converse and understand the issues that are very important. Recognizing the fact that, Black men have a broad set of issues and perspectives that we care about. One of the things that we did notice and that we had to really try to fix is the fact that, when candidates were talking about issues of Black men, they always wanted to default to criminal legal system and criminal justice reform. And these conversations really brought out the fact that we're so much more, dynamic and interested than that. We're interested in more things. We're interested in what we can do to make sure that our children have what they need. We're interested in economic opportunity. We're interested in supporting entrepreneurship and making sure that we have the resources that we need to make our ideas thrive in the business world. We're interested in having access to healthcare because we have unique health challenges within society. And so these conversations were really important because they were about people feeling heard. And the first step to organizing is listening. And so these were not sessions for candidates like Senator or VP-elect Harris to come and only talk about their policy and their plans, but the purpose of these was also for them to hear from Black men in the community. This case, it was on the west side of Detroit. This was pictured here. But like I said, we did them across the state. I think the impact was, it led to a much more, I think rigorous and progressive agenda from the Biden-Harris ticket. The Build Back Better plan for racial equity is frankly pretty extraordinary when it comes to the level of investment that will be made in communities of color and in the Black community in particular, investing in business and innovation hubs and capitalizing financial institutions so that they can actually lend to Black families that historically have had trouble getting loans. I mean, these kinds of things like free college tuition at HBCUs and public universities for households that make less than $125,000. That didn't just happen. Like, we had to organize to get that agenda to be a reality. And part of this was making sure that we created the space for these policymakers, present and future, to hear from Black men and hear from the community. And so I think in my role as Lieutenant Governor, it's really important to make sure that that space is held, to make sure that that space is, robust and muscular in the sense that the ideas that come there will be taken seriously, that they will end up reflected in policy. And I think it's a good sign that this administration, this incoming administration, was responsive to those kinds of conversations. And so this is the kind of work, again, that we need to do, not just during election years and during campaign season, but that we need to carry forward on and on to make sure that people know that we are always going to be on their side, listening to them, and then fighting alongside them. You can go to the next slide. When we get into voter mobilization, so that's obviously where the rubber meets the road. When we say that when more people vote, Democrats win, well, the when more people vote part is really important. So we need to therefore do some pretty important investing in making sure that folks turn out. So I led this Black Men Vote effort here in Michigan, and this poster is sort of one of the visual pieces of it. We did a number of different types of tactics. One we led these things called vote marches, partnered with organizations like Walk the Vote to literally lead like Pied Piper style marches, chanting loud, excited, marching people to places where they can vote or drop off their ballots. The first one we did was in Detroit. We marched on Woodward Avenue, which is the same place we marched for justice for George Floyd during the summer, where we marched 200 Black men from all walks of life, from people like myself. We had a couple other electeds. We had some union and labor leaders, and we had people who saw us marching and literally came out of their homes to join us to march to the Department of Elections in the New Center area of Detroit and cast ballots. It was really extraordinary and really inspiring to see people who were excited to jump on a train and go vote. And I don't know that all of those people were necessarily ready to be engaged, but they needed to see that others were excited about their voting power and potential. And so we did that in places like not only Detroit, but we did it in Benton Harbor, Michigan. We did it in Saginaw, Michigan. We did it in Flint, Michigan. I even did one in Traverse City, Michigan, although there weren't that many Black voters in that group. But this was really about, again, showing people that there is a movement to go and exercise one's political power. So we took that very seriously. We also sort of combined that with some social media, some digital campaigns. We've had posters like this placed strategically in neighborhoods across Detroit and other places so that folks just, understood that, yes, Black male voters do matter here, and that we want to see you at the polls on November 3rd. And I think the results do speak for themselves. If we'll obviously continue to get more election data pouring out between now and the end of the year. But what I can say is if you look at things like voter registration rates, for example, what we saw is that the voter registration rates among young Black men were up, oh gosh, it was somewhere north of 30% when compared to 2016, in 2020 when compared to 2016. That's because there was intentional deep work to register voters. That didn't just start in 2020. That work started as soon as we were able to begin implementing this, our 2018 reforms for the election. One of those included people being able to register to vote online for the first time in Michigan. So imagine the efficiency that brought to our voter registration efforts. I'm going to meet people where they are, and then I'm able to say, look, I don't even need you to fill out the paper. We can do this right now on your phone. And we implemented that, and we're able to sign people up, again, in places like Detroit, in the outer parts of Wayne County, cities like Inkster, Michigan, cities like Romulus, et cetera, River Rouge, these places where often folks are not remembering that there are lots of people who have lots of ideas. There are lots of voters, and we needed to go and meet them and register them. And that's why you saw again, the registration rate for Black folks and for Black men and for Black men under the age of 30 in particular increased significantly because of this kind of investment. This is exactly the type of work that we not only need to continue amongst Black men to make sure they're continuing to be engaged and continuing to vote in elections like 2022, when I'm on the ballot with Gretchen Whitmer, but we also need to do this type of work in other communities as well. And there is so much opportunity here. I don't remember if we have a slide on this or not, but one of the other groups, to give you an example of the diversity of the work that we invested in, was increasing registration rates and voter turnout amongst Indian American voters, specifically in places like Oakland County, Michigan. Those are the northwest suburbs of Detroit. We have seen tremendous growth in the Indian American community in the state of Michigan, so much so that now India is the #1 country of origin for immigrants in the state of Michigan. It has surpassed Mexico. It did so in 2019. But this is a community of folks who are very, very underrepresented in the electorate. The voter registration rate was pretty low, and the voter turnout rate was low as well. So working with some partners and allies in that county, through Generation Action Fund, my PAC, we were able to invest in some specific voter turnout strategies that led to, again, an increased turnout from that community in Oakland County, Michigan, this county that was so important to delivering the state for Joe Biden. And we've seen that actually in other states. It's this notion that, if we're looking at Indian American and Asian American and Pacific Islander voters across states, they're able to make differences in elections. That's part of the story, for example, in Georgia. So this is work that we need to continue to invest in, and doing that deep, specific relational work and doing it across communities of color is a way that we build this robust coalition that is forward-looking, because these communities are only going to grow. And the last element of this that is important is that this work with voters of color is not only about big cities. This is not only about the large municipalities in Michigan, like Detroit or like Grand Rapids or like Warren. The truth is, the story of the suburbs in 2018 is not in 2020 is not the story of white female voters, switching over and voting a little more Democratic. The story of the suburbs is that over years, over time, over the last 4 years, the suburbs have become more diverse. As more people of color, as more Black people, as more Latinos, as more Indian American voters are moving into the suburbs, that is what is turning them blue. And that is what is deepening the blue. And so that organizing work happening around cities will help us expand that core progressive base that we need to continue to win elections going forward, to continue to run up the score. And so my PAC really focused on that this year. We're going to continue to focus on investing in that kind of work going forward. This is just a picture from the march that I talked about in Detroit. We had 200 people marching to the polls. had a little fun with some chants. When we had people of all ages, you got my dad sitting next to me on my left. It was a lot. It was a lot of fun, and I think that was an important element of it. Is that it was fun. We didn't, you don't want voting to feel like work, right? You want it to feel like something that you're excited to do, and that you know is going to benefit you and your community, and that's exactly what this march was all about. I talked about this a little bit. This is a tweet from Tom Bonnier. Tom Bonnier is the CEO of a data firm called Target Smart, and just all in all, really, really intelligent and insightful data analyst. And so he talked about here in this tweet, just the vote margins in Detroit in 16 versus 20. And he talked about the fact, I think I alluded to this earlier, but there was this narrative right after the election when, frankly, we had incomplete understandings of the turnout because we didn't have certified results. That, wow, Joe Biden underperformed in Detroit. What happened? Blah, blah, blah. And this, you see this tweet is from November the 20th. So this is after we had perspective and we had certification and we had finality to the results. He's showing that actually Black voters showed up to deliver the state of Michigan and deliver it because of the turnout in Detroit. And I just like this one because it's a little bit of a flex. He gave me a shout out for, because he and I talked about this, and I told him that I don't think these takes are true. We got to wait on the numbers, wait on the numbers. So when they came out, I appreciate him shouting me out. But what that shows is that there is a quantitative justification for this investment. When we do this, it leads to victories. So just to wrap up this part before we get to some more questions, I think we always need to be thinking about what we need to do going forward. As I alluded to earlier, our next statewide elections are the midterm elections here in Michigan. We have our congressionals up. We actually don't have a Senate race this year in 22, but our gubernatorial race is up. We got, for the governor, myself, Secretary of State, Attorney General, all the statewides are up in 22, along with the state house, which we were trying to flip this year and unfortunately were unable to do so. And importantly, the Michigan State Senate. The legislature here is currently controlled, both chambers are controlled by Republicans. Because of the organizing work across the state of Michigan, we actually were able to flip control of the state Supreme Court to Democratic control. So basically now Democrats have two branches of government, the executive branch across the board and the Supreme Court. But we have work to do in the legislature. So when we're talking about how we do this organizing going forward, we need to look at the areas where we know that we can flip legislative seats. We know that Gretchen Whitmer and I can make gains over what we did in 2018. And key to that work is going to be the kinds of investments that we made this year. The investment in the relationship building amongst voters of color. Investing deeply in the infrastructure to support Black voters, to support Indian American voters, to support Latino voters in every part of the state. The investment in continuing to close those gaps and to flip some of those more rural counties. In 2018, we actually won a number of rural counties. You saw that Joe Biden, for example, in that one slide, showed that he only won one county in the Upper Peninsula. We won 3 in 2018. We can build on that. We won Macomb County in 2018. And we continue to build on that as well. But that's going to take infrastructure. And so that is communications infrastructure. That is the training and leadership development infrastructure so that people know how to have these relational, deep canvassing conversations that will meet people where they are, that aren't going to come at them, with a crazy hard ask in the beginning, but instead are going to start with, look, I'm here to talk about what's important to you right now and what's important to you going forward. And I think we'll be able to then paint a picture about how the more progressive vision of the future prepares people for these kinds of generational investments that they can make, that we can make in the public sector, that the generational investments that can be made in our people's future. And so that is what my organization that I formed last year, Generation Action Fund, my PAC, really exists to do, is to unlock generational opportunities for a progressive future. And so I certainly appreciate the ideas and perspective that all of you have, and I'm looking forward to working with you in Michigan and as you continue your investment in Michigan, and know that you have a partner in me in this work. I've described some of the types of things that we did in 2020. It's only going to get bigger and better and more creative going forward, and I would welcome the opportunity to partner with you, would appreciate your support to help us have the resources we need to go bigger and really be a model for this kind of organizing to happen And also that maybe then once we get that model understood, that's something that can be replicated in other states, because we have other states to win too. We have other states to flip. And we have other states to deepen our victories so that we can win more things, not just at the federal level, but at the state and local level as well. And the last piece I'll say before I really stop is the other thing that we passed in 2018 is an independent redistricting commission, meaning that we are working to end gerrymandering in the state of Michigan. That is a huge organizing opportunity, because if we have maps that are more fair, it enables us to compete in more places. So that is why we need to have strong organizing infrastructure that can reach across the state of Michigan, that can reach people where they are, so that we can really do this work and we can give them more victories than we otherwise would have.
That's all really excellent, and congratulations on amazing work. I think it's a real inspiration to us all in terms of, you know, what can be done. I also think it was a good message to Trump and his cronies about, you know, don't come back to Michigan at this point.
You know,
But,
Andy, he said that if I lose Michigan, I'll never come back here. So
yeah, good.
We're going to hold him to that, hopefully.
Yeah, hold him to that. You know, I think there are some questions on people's minds, and I wanted to kind of ask you maybe to elaborate on a few things. You know, the first one is with kind of voter suppression. I mean, what the president was doing with the U.S. Postal Service, you know, him trying to dissuade people from using drop boxes and mail-in ballots. How did that affect, you know, your work in Michigan, and what do you think is kind of the future of some of those suppression tactics that I think the right is going to try and implement?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of lessons from that. One is, you know, Trump's people listened to him. Like, his people didn't vote by mail. His people didn't use the drop boxes. Like, they waited and voted on election day. So it showed you that there was a very, very loyal base to this president, which again shows that we have a lot of deep and urgent work to do from an organizing perspective in Michigan, let alone across the country. Those suppression tactics, they meant that we had to do a lot of work to let people know that the drop boxes are safe. The drop boxes are secure. No one's tampering with the drop box. This is actually the safest way for you to vote. You can drop it off in a minute. You know, the best way you get your ballot home in person. Voting by mail has been happening for a really long time. It didn't just start this year. And just because more people are doing it does not mean it's broken. That's a good thing. And so we need to make sure that it's safe. So we had to do a lot of work to make sure people understood that and that we were able to inoculate against that. But so much of this suppression was really, I think, grounded in the fear of record turnout. I think Republicans were afraid of a ton of people voting because they thought they would lose. I think they understood that, even though they hit, just like we hit our turnout targets, like they hit theirs too. But us hitting our turnout target meant that we had more people. Like, so I think that going forward, to me, it's a reminder of the vigilance that we need to have with the how of voting, that it is sort of the last step, that once we are able to help a person recognize the power and potential of casting their ballot as part of their civic engagement, we do need to put that final touch on it. Like, this is how you do it. And I think that was perhaps underappreciated in previous organizing efforts, but we were very overt about that this time. And I don't think we're going to lose that going forward. And that's a good thing to overcome those kinds of suppression tactics. Now, look, Republicans are creative. They're going to try to find new ways to suppress votes. So we need to be ready for that. But if we're always focusing our message and closing it with how you actually close the deal, I think we'll be better organizers for it.
You know, one of the things that, you know, we work with you on, and thanks so much for connecting us with groups like Mothering Justice, Detroit Action. You know, we worked with Moses and Michigan People's Campaign. You know, what is the importance of relational organizing and, you know, being on the ground with community organizations for turning out voters, and as a part of, I think, the overall strategy to really get people inspired and to turn out? Can you comment a little bit on that?
Yes, I can, because that is critical work. That is how movements are built. Movements are not built through elections. Movements are built through organizing that happens day to day to day. The conversations, the connections, the trust that is built. And so organizations like the ones you mentioned are some of the best in the country. Mothering Justice, Detroit Action, Moses, these are some of the best organizers that I've ever worked with. And what they do is they pull people in, not by even waving a bunch of carrots in front of them, by saying that, listen, we trust you, that you understand what it takes to improve life in your community. We trust you that you are able to understand and articulate what you want to see and what you need to see from a policy perspective to help us move our communities forward. And so as an elected official, one of the things that strengthens me is having relationships with these organizations and with their leaders and with their members. And that's why I spend so much time with them. And I think maybe that's colored a little bit by the fact that this is the movement that I come from, like before I got into politics. But nevertheless, the theory of change is absolutely real and right, that this is where true power comes from. And so we have to recognize that this is the infrastructure that must be invested in. And it can't just be invested in this kind of way that balloons one year and then goes away the next, because you can't build an institution that way. And so that kind of continued dedicated support to these creative, courageous organizers. Like Detroit Action, for example, they had a member who was unfortunately killed, was shot to death in 2019. I just remember like going and being with the team and the family. The governor and I went to spend time with them, just think about that, because this is relational work. But those relationships are then what you can count on, because you're willing to go out on a limb for somebody you have a relationship with. You're willing to take a chance if you've built that relationship and built that trust. And so that's what I need to foster as an elected, and that's what these organizations foster every day as community institutions.
One of the other things that's kind of important to PowerPAC's mission is kind of the multiracial nature of our communities, and how do we build coalitions and collaborations. I mean, one of the things that we saw in this particular cycle was that, there was some conflicts and problems in terms of reaching out to the Latino population in places like Florida and Texas and so on. And I think Georgia is going to be really critical in terms of the January runoffs, how the Latino and API populations play into that. So, is there any advice or thoughts about like how you kind of work to build those kinds of levels of trust between the communities, and how to really kind of turn out across multiple, communities of color?
Yeah, so I think the first important piece is that you actually need to talk about identity. You need to talk about race. You need to talk about the differences that have been experienced across race and not be afraid of that. I think one of the things that Democrats have been a little hesitant, a little mushy when it comes to wanting to talk about these issues, but they are real. And I think the way that you connect with voters is by being, frankly, as visceral as possible. And so talking about a person's actual experience, like I'm Black every day, okay? Like I can't get away from that. I can't forget that. That shows up in every interaction that I have and everything that I try to do. And so it is tone deaf to pretend like that's not true when you're engaging people. So first of all, I think we need to be unapologetic about addressing the fact that, people's identities matter in terms of how they move through the world, and in terms of the types of policies that are going to be responsive to their needs. That's one thing, is we just can't pretend that that's not true. The second thing I think that's important is then we need to invest. We need to invest in the leadership development that will enable leaders from these different communities that we're trying to organize to be able to do the work amongst their community, and not feel like we need to have somebody else come in and do it. Like, people know themselves pretty well. Like people can do the work. They already have relationships through other means and opportunities, and we need to really build upon that infrastructure and leverage that. And so that means investing and trusting in these communities, because I think that, again, just like you will go out on a limb for someone you have a relationship with, you will certainly go out on a limb for someone who trusts you with power. And the truth is, I think our message needs to be to every community that we trust you. We trust your ideas. We trust in your participation. We trust what you're going to bring to the table. And so then in turn, we're asking them to trust us, to represent, to advocate, to push, to fight, to be the one that's in the room negotiating and not forgetting about the people who trusted us and entrusted us with this power. That mutual trust is important. And I think for communities of color, when we're talking about, especially these growing communities that are so decisive electorally, again, that's why Generation Action Fund made that investment. We are seeing that trend. And just personally, look, I'm a Black man. I think I just said that. And I was born in Detroit, but when I was a kid, we moved to Oakland County. We moved to Farmington. So like this whole story of the diversification of the suburbs is like literally my life story. So again, this is about how can we find and meet people where they are, recognizing the opportunities for organizing power to be built, and then investing in the people in those communities to go out and do that work.
One of the things that has come up for PowerPack has been that, like when we did our work in Georgia in 2018, when Stacey was running for governor, we really focused on the non-Atlanta, non-urban areas. We put a lot of emphasis and money into following up on what were suburban and rural areas. And I think that was really critical because, Jason Carter lost those areas by 300,000 votes. And we've been able to really build up a very, very large kind of segment of voters in those areas that have become part of, community groups kind of base of votes that they go after now. And so I was wondering, from your experiences in Michigan in terms of these rural areas and tactics and so on, and even in terms of what you're thinking of doing in the future, is there advice for Georgia and this upcoming runoff, like things that we need to really pay attention to and think about as we try and make sure that we're not losing, all these elections in the rural areas?
Yeah, I mean, one for Georgia, like we got to keep doing it. Look, I'm doing work to support Raphael Warnock in particular, specifically in Georgia. My team is working on that. This is to say this is important is the understatement of 2020.
Right.
So that work's important, but you need to continue to make that investment. Remember, there are two sides to the winning electoral equation. One is getting as many votes as you can, and the second one is taking votes from the other side. And so that first slide that we showed that had all those counties highlighted in Michigan, I think was an illustration of that. Like, we were able to deepen deepen the margin of our victories in places that, we knew we were going to win, places like Wayne County and Oakland County, et cetera, Washtenaw County, where University of Michigan is, et cetera, things like that. But in so many of those counties that Donald Trump won, those margins shrank. They got smaller. And they got smaller because we were doing work there. We were connecting with people. We were showing people that there's a different way and that the things that this person is selling are not the things that are best for this community, this state, and this country. And those are conversations, people are ripe to have those conversations. And so it's not just because a county didn't flip from red to blue, that does not mean that was a lost county. Because closing a margin by 3 points, by 7 points, by 12 points, that makes a difference because that means that there are less votes on the table for those who were trying to defeat in elections. And so we need to not be afraid of that work. And we need to not be afraid to go to go there, just again, in Michigan, look, I'm a Black guy from Detroit. And, you could imagine some strategies that would not involve me going to every part of the state of Michigan, even though I'm a whole statewide elected official. But that is not the way that we approach leadership, not the way that Gretchen Whitmer and I have looked at this job. And so I spend time in the Upper Peninsula. I spend time in the northern Lower Peninsula. I spend time in the thumb of Michigan, these places that have been red for a long time. But the reason that we do it is because, one, we need to show that our leadership can deliver for people in all walks of life, that there is not a group that we don't have the values to fight for. And the second is that you certainly can't expect people to support you if you're not going to be there for them. And so we need to show up. 90% of life is showing up. 95% of leadership is showing up. And so I think when this comes to this organizing opportunity for electoral power, we have to be everywhere. We do not have a choice because these margins, as slim as they are, that means that we cannot have an electoral strategy, a voter contact strategy that leaves voters off the table. We can't afford that. This stuff is too close and the stakes are too high. So we have to invest everywhere statewide, and that goes for Georgia, Michigan, and every other state.
So my last question is a little bit on, it's very cool that you started this pack, and I wasn't sure if there was anything you might want to elaborate on the purpose of the pack, and maybe mention a little bit about, where people can go to donate. But can you describe a little bit about, what was your thought in starting up the pack?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Andy. So the premise of it is, again, I believe that there are investments to be made today that can unlock generational opportunities for movement building, for community empowerment. And this pack really is seeking to sort of find those opportunities. So then again, two of those opportunities this year were Black male voters, both in cities, but also in suburbs. And then the second one was this opportunity to organize Indian American voters, most specifically in Oakland County, Michigan. That is a generational opportunity because I believe that the first entity, the first group, the first party that actually organizes you to step into your electoral political power, it's going to be hard to shake somebody from sticking with that party for a long time. That is a generational power building moment, the first time a person gets organized to become a voter. And so that investment this year was in unlocking that. And so I'm going to continue to look for those opportunities with this PAC and continue to direct resources into that investment. And the second piece that you're going to see from the PAC activities this year is we want to continue to build sort of platforms and strategies that will enable people to stay engaged. Now that you've been a voter, the work is not over. The work has just begun. It is the front door to civic engagement, not the caboose on the train, if I can mix metaphors. So we need to make sure that people are staying engaged. So you're going to see a lot of activities. As the Black Men Vote Project, for example, is evolving to Black Men Lead, where we're going to have community conversations about different ideas, perspectives, and policies. We're going to be connecting people with resources to get engaged in their community, to show leadership. We're also going to be connecting people to practical resources, because I talked about those things about people having ideas and wanting to get connected with resources that can support them, growing their entrepreneurial potential, whether it's social entrepreneurs or any other kind of entrepreneurs, want to connect people with those kind of resources. I believe that it's important to show value in a lot of different ways. We're going to continue to invest in making it easy for people to access the kinds of information and resources that they need to be an empowered resident and empowered citizen. The first time I ran for office, Andy, was, as you know, was in 2017. I ran to be the Detroit city clerk, in part because of that close election margin in Michigan. And so that was the election administrator, for those who don't know, in Detroit. And so, but I saw that job not really as about administering elections. I saw it as the front door to democracy. I saw it as the pathway to the information that people needed to be able to transform that more informed status into political power. And so this PAC will also be making sure that people have access to those kinds of information and resources so that they can step into the power that they already have. I don't think that power in this sense is created nor destroyed. I think it is realized, and then it is pulled from people by organizing. And that's the kind of organizing this PAC's going to do. I think it's going to build a lot of power in Michigan that's going to help us not only electorally, but I think it's going to help our movement be stronger. And I hope that we can inspire the same in other states.
So I would encourage all the donors that are listening to take a look at this work. 2 years is actually a very short period of time, really. So obviously we can take a little time to rest for Christmas, but January starts anew. And so I do really encourage folks to take a look at the work of the Lieutenant Governor and his PAC and what he's doing in Michigan to really kind of protect democracy these days. As we close out here, though, Lieutenant Governor, I don't know if you have any closing comments or thoughts that you'd like to leave the donors with.
Well, I do want to provide my just ringing endorsement for Power Pack. And again, I think it's some of the just smartest work. Whenever you make an investment, you want it to be well targeted, well positioned to have maximum impact. And I think Power Pack is so good at that, so good at, again, finding that insight. What is the insight that's going to make a difference? That if we're able to invest here, invest in this way, it's going to make a big difference. And I think that, certainly this group has a track record of doing that. And so I can't overstate, I think, how important it is to support this organization specifically, as well as my PAC. But I think that
Thanks.
I think that seriously, the work that Power Pack does inspires me as an organizer and as a leader. And I'm proud to be on the team here. I'm proud to be able to work alongside them. I was proud to make sure that they were able to connect with some fantastic organizations in the state of Michigan to do difference making work. I know that's the same kind of work they're going to do in every state that they invest in. And so this is absolutely the right place to be.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much for that. And we really appreciate your work and what you've been doing in Michigan. I mean, I've been a fan ever since we met, so it's been about 10 years now. But I do think that, the work that you've done has been so excellent in Michigan. And obviously the flipping of Michigan was critical to everyone having kind of a chance to breathe easy, coming in. And I guess the timing is good now that there's a coronavirus vaccine that's on its way. So,
Yeah.
we're all kind of looking optimistically towards January.
Well,
But
I won't say that Michigan is the most important state, but I will say this. After the Michigan election results were certified, 2 hours later, that is when the GSA finally said Joe Biden could be the real president-elect and the transition could begin. I'm just saying these things are connected. So
yeah, no, that's just fact, right? That's just fact.
I mean, the facts have a Michigan bias, so it's what
They
it is.
do. They do. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much to all the donors that are watching this and attending. And we very much appreciate your support. Keep an eye out for the last debrief that we're putting together, and keep an eye out for our pitch on supporting Georgia. A lot more work to be done. And then, of course, in January, we start anew, and we are looking forward to collaborating with the Lieutenant Governor and other allies in Michigan, and we hope to continue work there. So thanks so much, everyone, and we'll talk